The mission of spreading the gospel of Christ was probably the most important and most successful task ever given to a group of men and women in human history. A small group, out of which 12 men stood out, grew in less than 2,000 years into a total of 2.64 billion followers. There's no denying that the apostles achieved their goal, but there's also no denying that their success came at a high cost. They paid for it with their own blood. So, how did each one of them die? And where and when did it happen? We've done the research and uncovered the tragic fate of each of these men who gave their lives willingly to fulfill their mission. Today, we'll walk you through how each of these brave men met their end. Men who helped change the world in ways that can never be forgotten. Welcome to Verses and Civilizations, the channel where history meets the Bible to help us understand the biblical facts through the lens of knowledge in a deeper, more meaningful way. Thomas. To many, Thomas is remembered only as the doubting apostle. That's because when Jesus rose from the dead, Thomas asked for direct proof that the one he was seeing was truly his master, and not some deceptive entity of evil. As written in chapter 20 of the Gospel of John,
"Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were, I will not believe."
But 8 days later, Jesus appears again and invites Thomas to touch his wounds as proof. Thomas then utters one of the most powerful declarations of faith in the entire Bible.
"My Lord and my God."
And right after that, Jesus says,
"Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed."
Despite his moment of doubt, there's no denying that Thomas had tremendous qualities, including a fearless willingness to be martyred for the gospel. A great example of this is found right before Jesus performs one of his greatest miracles, the resurrection of Lazarus. We read the following passage again in the Gospel of John.
"Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, 'Let us also go, that we may die with him.'"
And in another powerful moment, Thomas questions Jesus about his message, leading to one of the most iconic responses in all of Scripture.
Thomas said to him, "Lord, we don't know where you are going, so how can we know the way?" Jesus answered, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me."
The name Thomas comes from the Aramaic Toma, which means twin. This could suggest that the apostle may have had an older twin brother, or at least would have had one if that sibling had survived infancy, as child mortality was very high at the time. In some Bible translations, Thomas is referred to as Didymus, which also means twin. According to Christian tradition, Thomas was one of the apostles who ventured farthest in his mission to spread the gospel. He traveled through Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, and into Persia, which is today's Iran. After preaching in those regions, he is believed to have journeyed to India, arriving in Kodungalur, in the state of Kerala, around the year 52 after Christ. There, Thomas is said to have performed great works and faced serious opposition from those hostile to his message. Despite that, he was able to establish 7 Christian communities among the local caste groups. Later, he moved on to southeast India, near Mylapore in the state of Chennai, where he was eventually martyred. It is said that he died in 72 after Christ, pierced by multiple spears under orders from Hindu priests who were angered by the number of conversions he was inspiring. According to oral accounts from Indian Christians, his body was buried in Chennai, and his tomb became a pilgrimage site for Christians from around the world, including those from Syria and Armenia. Because of this, a small memorial was built over the site sometime in the 4th century. Centuries later, in the early 16th century, Portuguese explorers arrived and were surprised to find that there were already Christians living in the region. As an expression of faith, they built a church in European architectural style, and between 1893 and 1996, the British built the current basilica structure that still stands today, beneath which lies the crypt that is believed to hold the bones of the Apostle Thomas. Matthew. Among Christ's disciples, the one who likely faced the most rejection or difficulty fitting in with the others was Matthew. His job as a tax collector, working for the Roman Empire, was seen as cursed, making him, in other words, someone considered unclean or a traitor. Publicans were more or less like modern-day customs officers. Back then, just like today, many in that position used it to get rich through corruption. Because of this, even though Matthew wasn't necessarily dishonest, it's safe to assume he had a financially comfortable life, which he gave up entirely the moment he heard Jesus' call. Regarding his past, it's clear Matthew never forgot who he had been. In fact, he makes a point of referring to himself as a tax collector in his own gospel when listing the apostles. His name in Hebrew is Matityahu. In Greek, the language in which the New Testament was written, he's called Matthaios. In both languages, the name means the same thing: gift of God, or God's present. In addition to the name Matthew, this apostle also had a second name. He was also known as Levi, son of Alphaeus. Unlike many of the other apostles who came from small villages in Galilee, Matthew lived in Capernaum, where he reported to his Roman superiors at a local administrative center. After Pentecost, it's believed that the former tax collector set out on a missionary journey around the world. He is said to have passed through hostile regions such as Syria and Persia, eventually reaching Ethiopia, where his life would come to a tragic end. According to Ethiopian and Coptic Christian sources, Matthew was burned alive in a city called Nadaba in Ethiopia. Because of this, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church considers Matthew to be one of its spiritual founders. In the 10th century, the Catholic Church claimed that his relics were brought to Salerno, Italy, where they remain to this day in the Cathedral of St. Matthew. That cathedral was consecrated by Pope Gregory VII in the year 1084 and remains a major pilgrimage site for Catholics. Now let's talk about two of the most iconic apostles of Christ. If you're enjoying the content, subscribe to the channel and like our video. James. There were actually two apostles named James among Christ's disciples. We're going to focus now on James, the son of Zebedee, the brother of John the Evangelist. James was originally from Bethsaida, the same city as Peter, Andrew, and Philip, or possibly from Capernaum, which was also Matthew's hometown. The Bible doesn't make this completely clear, but one thing's certain: his profession, like many of the apostles, was fishing. The name James is a Latin form of the Hebrew name Yaakov. In English, that name is usually translated as Jacob, but in Greek, it became Iakobos, and later in Latin, it evolved into Iacobus, or Tiago. Contrary to what many believe, they probably weren't just simple fishermen, as they owned their own boats, and even had hired workers, which was something only wealthier people could afford.
Immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him.
Together with Peter and John, James was one of Christ's closest apostles, as seen in events like the Transfiguration, where only those three accompanied Jesus. He was also one of the three present when Jairus' daughter was brought back to life. We also know that both he and John were called Boanerges by Christ himself, which literally means sons of thunder, a nickname that reflected their fiery personalities. One example is found in the book of Luke, chapter 9, where it says,
When the disciples James and John saw this, they asked, Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them, as Elijah did?
So yeah, it's safe to say that Jesus' nickname for them made a lot of sense. After Pentecost, James focused his ministry on Jerusalem, which was thought to have a population of about 100,000 people at the time, a very large number for that period. However, beginning around the 7th century, a tradition emerged that James had also evangelized in Hispania, modern-day Spain, particularly in the Galicia region. According to this tradition, James preached and converted people in a place called Asaconia, a Roman settlement that would later fall under the rule of the Suebi, one of the first non-Roman peoples to convert to Christianity. That very place would later become the famous city of Santiago de Compostela, a name given in honor of the Apostle James. According to tradition, he eventually returned to Jerusalem, where Herod Agrippa I is said to have ordered his execution. The Bible states that he was killed by the sword, which most likely means he was beheaded. James was probably the first apostle to lose his life because of his preaching of the gospel, as his death is believed to have occurred around the year 44 after Christ. In fact, it is recorded in the book of Acts.
He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword.
However, according to Catholic tradition, at some point, James's followers transported his remains from Jerusalem to Asaconia, where they built a small shrine to house them. As news spread, Christian pilgrims began visiting the site, drawn by the belief that it contained the remains of one of Christ's apostles. But this only lasted until the 3rd century, when Christians in Spain faced intense persecution under the Roman Empire. The tomb would only be rediscovered 6 centuries later, when King Alfonso II of Asturias ordered a chapel to be built on the site. About 100 years later, another monarch, Alfonso IV, King of Leon, began the construction of the Chapel of St. James in the year 1075. The construction of the temple took no less than 37 years, and it was only completed in the year 1112. According to Catholic tradition, the apostle's tomb remains intact to this day in that very spot. John, unlike his brother, who was the first apostle to be martyred, John would be the last of the 12 to die. His name in Hebrew is Yohanan, and in Greek it is Ioannis, which means God is gracious. John is believed to have authored 4 books in the Bible: the Gospel of John, the 3 epistles of John, and the final book of the Bible, Revelation. Besides all the moments he shared with his brother James, one passage especially shows the deep affection John felt for Jesus, as recorded in his own Gospel, chapter 13.
Now there was leaning on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples, whom Jesus loved.
This clearly shows the close friendship between Jesus and his disciples. It's also known that John was the first of the apostles to recognize the risen Christ, as described in this passage.
Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him and jumped into the water.
John was also entrusted by Jesus to care for his mother, Mary. According to a Catholic tradition, though not historically verified, John was once thrown into a cauldron of boiling oil in Rome, but miraculously emerged unharmed. A tradition preserved by Irenaeus, Eusebius, and Jerome holds that John was exiled between 95 and 96 after Christ, during the 14th year of the reign of the Roman Emperor Domitian. What we do know is that in his old age, John was taken to Patmos, an island off the coast of Greece. There, John is said to have received the visions of the end times and written the book of Revelation, where he described, in symbolic and often mysterious language, events that were still to come. The interpretation of this book varies widely among Christian denominations: Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox. John is believed to be the only one of the 12 apostles to have died a natural death, passing away around the year 100 after Christ in the city of Ephesus, in what is now Turkey. Eventually, a Christian basilica was built over what was believed to be the apostle's tomb. Believed because some claim that John didn't actually die, but was taken up to heaven. The church dedicated to the apostle John was commissioned by Emperor Justinian between 548 and 565 after Christ. There's a passage written by the Greek historian Procopius in his work Buildings, where he wrote, "This church, which was small and in ruins due to its great age, was torn down by Emperor Justinian and replaced by one so large and beautiful that, to put it simply, it rivaled the sanctuary dedicated to all the apostles in the imperial city." By the 15th century, with the arrival of the Ottoman Turks and the decline of Ephesus, the basilica was abandoned. Over the centuries, it suffered severe earthquake damage, being almost completely destroyed during one of them. Today, the ancient church lies in ruins and no longer functions as an active place of worship, but it remains an archaeological site of immense historical and religious importance, open to visitors. As for John's tomb, no body has ever been found there since the site began being excavated and studied, suggesting his remains may have been moved elsewhere, though no one knows where. Nevertheless, the writings of this former son of thunder, who would come to be known as the Apostle of Love, continue to resonate today. They spark reflection and debate on topics ranging from the foundations of relationships in love and compassion to the signs and chaos that some believe will herald the end of days. This was only the second of 3 parts, exploring the life and death of the 12 faithful apostles of Christ. If you enjoyed it, share this video with others who love diving deeper into biblical topics through the lens of history. See you in the next video.